Chapter 16. Good Time. The free world was getting closer. Despite my incident report in November, I was on course to serve 13 months of my 15-month sentence and be released in March with good time, the standard federal sentence reduction for good behavior. In January, I would be eligible to go to a halfway house in deep Brooklyn on Myrtle Avenue, known as Murder Avenue in the camp. Prison scuttlebutt was that as soon as you passed a few drug tests and found a job, the halfway house would send you home, as long as they could claim your paycheck. Natalie would be waiting for me on Murder Avenue. I said goodbye to my bunkie the first week of December. The night before she left, I was practically jumping out of my skin, asking her questions, leaning over from the top bunk to look at her lying below me for the last night. Natalie seemed to have willed herself into a state of calm. The next morning, as she said goodbye to the assembled crowd of well-wishers, I was hopping nervously around the front door like a little kid. I wanted to be last. I was trying to keep my cool, even more than when Yoga Janet left. Natalie, I don't know what I would have done without you. I love you. This was probably the most direct thing I'd ever said to the proud woman I had lived with so intimately for 9 months. I was going to lose the battle with tears again. In the last month, I had become the freaking waterworks queen. Natalie hugged me gently. "Bunkie, it's okay. I'll see you soon. I'm gonna be waiting for you in Brooklyn." "That's right, Natalie. Hold it down till I get there." She smiled and walked tall out the door for the last time. Pop was also supposed to go to a halfway house in January. One reason she and I grew so close was that we were going home at the same time. For Pop, as well as Natalie, going home meant something very different than it did for me. Pop had been down for more than 12 years, since the early 1990s. She remembered a world with no cell phones, no internet, and no probation officer to report to. She was nervous as hell. We spent many hours talking about what it would be like when she was released. First to a halfway house for 6 months, and then to the house that she would share with her family. Her husband was in prison down south, due for release in 3 years. She planned to work in a restaurant and confided that she would like to buy and run a hot dog cart someday. She was nervous about computers, nervous about the halfway house, nervous about her kids, and nervous about leaving the place that, for better or worse, had been her home for more than a decade. I was nervous too, but not about going home. In the second week of December, I received a letter from my lawyer, Pat Cotter, in Chicago, that informed me that one of my co-defendants, a man named Jonathan Bibby, was going on trial, and I might be called to testify as a witness. He reminded me that under the terms of my plea agreement, I was required to provide complete and truthful testimony if called upon by the government. Pat advised me that the feds could choose to transport me to Chicago to appear in court, and were in fact planning to do so. He wrote, "It is not that I would not enjoy the opportunity to see you again, of course, but it is my understanding, based on comments of prior clients, that travel courtesy of the Bureau of Prisons can be an uncomfortable and tiring experience for the inmate involved. I would like to spare you that experience if possible." I was horrified. Jonathan Bibby was a stranger to me. I didn't want to go to Chicago, and I certainly didn't want to be a government witness. A rat. I wanted to stay right here in the camp and do headstands and go to movie night with Pop. I called my lawyer and explained that I had never even met Jonathan Bibby, that I couldn't pick him out of a lineup. If I were moved to Chicago for his trial, it might screw up my halfway house date in January. Could he please make some calls on my behalf and let the U.S. Attorney know that I had no personal experience with the defendant and couldn't possibly be a valuable witness? "Of course," he said. I sensed I shouldn't count on staying in Danbury. I kept it all to myself, telling only Pop about the letter. "Oh, baby," she said, "the airlift." She was talking about the federal transport system, Con Air. The airlift is nothing nice. With Natalie gone, I lived solo in my cube for several days. The naked, ticking stripe of her mattress made me feel lonely. I had been down long enough to know that just waiting passively for the prison gods to give me a wonderful new bunkie was a losing strategy. Faith, my next-door neighbor, was a good egg, and so a switch of cubes was engineered, and I got permission to move next door. I was now sleeping in the bunk that Vanessa had occupied, and Colleen before her. Faith was very different from Natalie, though happily not much more talkative. She was very glad to have me as a bunkie, and would tell me about her pretty teenage daughter back in New Hampshire while she knitted. She had a special knitting permit. Faith was doing a long drug sentence, and I vaguely gathered that she had taken the fall for someone else. She worried constantly about her daughter, whom she hadn't seen in over a year. She was making her a green sweater for Christmas. There never seemed to be more than 3 or 4 colors of acrylic yarn at the commissary: gray, white, burgundy, and green. And they would run out of the burgundy and green all the time, frustrating the hobbyists. Jay was crocheting Christmas toys for her kids. She had started months in advance. I couldn't see anything harder in prison than being a mom, especially at the holidays. I got a letter from Pom Pom, formerly of the garage, who had just gone home to Trenton. Dear Piper, I just asked about you. I'm so happy to receive a letter and some pictures from you. My sister said I was fatter when I was in there. I told her it's just the clothes. Anyway, I can't believe you got a shot. Amy told me her bunkie went to the SHU, but she didn't tell me you got a shot. That place is really going nuts. Pom Pom, whose mother had preceded her at Danbury, had been worried about what would happen when she was released. She had relatives who grudgingly agreed to let her live with them, though she also considered going straight to a homeless shelter. Now she was back on the outside, and she had received a chilly reception. The apartment where she was living was in a neighborhood where gunfire was audible every day, much scarier than the Danbury shooting range. The cupboards had been completely bare, and she had taken the little money she had to stock the house with food, shampoo, and toilet paper. She was sleeping on the floor. God, I miss you. It's sad to say I miss that place, 'cause it's crazy out here. All this freedom, but still I feel like I'm locked up. I could truly say y'all was my family. I had a birthday, and what did I get? Nothing. And I had to beg for a Thanksgiving dinner. Now you know why I was so scared to come home. We would have made a big deal about her birthday in the camp. But Pom Pom still drew on a deep reserve of good humor, which she'd needed to survive her life so far. She sent me a list of people she wanted me to give her good wishes. Her bunkie, Jay, the remaining garage girls, and a heartfelt pep talk on how to make it to my own release. She closed, "Love always, Pom Pom." It was the strangest feeling ever, but I wished that Pom Pom was back here with us in prison. I was scared for her out there. At least in the BOP ghetto, the perimeter guards were the only ones armed with guns, and they never got out of their trucks. "Piper?" Amy peeked around my cube doorway. I didn't usually allow company up in my cube, preferring to do my visiting out in the common areas. "What's up, monster?" I had started calling Amy the little monster back when we worked together in electric. It was a deserved nickname, as she was foul-mouthed and foul-tempered and disrespected just about everyone and everything. But I loved Amy in spite of myself, and she made me laugh. She wanted to be so tough, and she was in a street urchin way, but I thought of her as a spitting, hissing kitten that you could hold at arm's length by the scruff of its neck. Still, kittens have sharp claws and teeth. Now Amy rushed to the side of my bunk and scrambled up on my footstool. I could see she was upset. She was supposed to go home before me to upstate New York. I knew there was uncertainty waiting for her at home, too, though not as dire as Pom Pom's situation. For several weeks she had been trying to sort out her living and work arrangements over the phone, and she was stressed out. She was trying to get hold of her father with increasing desperation and having trouble with the phone system. As she explained her frustration, the words spilled out faster and faster until she choked on them, hiccuping. "Come up here, Amy." I made room on my bed and she scrambled up. "I'm sorry things are uncertain right now. It's going to be okay. You're going to be home soon." I put my arm around her while she cried. She buried her head in my lap. "I want my daddy." I shushed her and patted the blonde curls she was so proud of. And inside I grieved angrily over the insanity of locking up children and then returning them to neighborhoods that were more desperate and dangerous than jails. I saw on the call-out that I was scheduled to spend my afternoon in a mandatory pre-release class on housing, and my blood pressure started to rise. All federal prisoners are required to go through a series of pre-release classes before they re-enter society. This made perfect sense. Many of the women in Danbury had been cloistered away in prison for years, and despite the harshness of being institutionalized, it was also infantilizing. The idea that they were going to hit the ground running and be able to cope with the day-to-day requirements of life on the outs was ridiculous. I had been pretty curious about what the re-entry classes would convey to us. The first one I was required to attend was on health. I showed up in the visiting room at the appointed time. Chairs had been set out for 20 women, and a CO who worked in food services down in the FCI was there to lead it. I leaned over and asked Sheena, seated next to me, why he was teaching. "He used to play professional baseball," she replied by way of explanation. I thought about that for a minute, as if there were any sense to it. But why is someone from Danbury teaching this class, and why not someone from Health Services? Sheena rolled her eyes at me. "Are all the classes taught by the prison staff? They don't work on the outside with ex-offenders. They spend all their time here. What do they know about re-entry?" "Pipes, you're looking for logic in all the wrong places." The guy from food services was very nice and very funny. We liked him a lot. He told us that it was important to eat right, exercise, and treat your body as a temple. But he didn't tell us how to get health care services that people with no money could afford. He didn't tell us how we could quickly obtain birth control and other reproductive health services. He didn't recommend any solutions for behavioral or psychiatric care, and for sure some of those broads needed it. He didn't say what options there might be for people who had struggled with substance abuse, sometimes for decades, when they were confronted by old demons on the outside. Another class had been titled Positive Attitude and was taught by the former warden's secretary. We liked her very little, as she was deeply condescending toward us. Her talk detailed her epic struggle to diet her way into a fancy dress for a holiday party. Tragically, she had not been able to lose the weight, but she still had fun at the party because she had managed to keep her positive attitude. I looked around the room in disbelief. There were women in there who had lost their parental rights and would have to battle to reunite with their children. Women who had nowhere to go and so would be heading to homeless shelters. Women who had never worked in the mainstream economy and must find real jobs or end up back in prison. I had none of these concerns because I was so much luckier than the majority of the women I'd been living with in Danbury, but I felt disrespected by how trivial these classes were turning out to be. The next one was led by the dour German nun who ran the chapel and was so vague it's hard to recall, but dealt with personal growth. Next, we heard about housing. Housing, employment, health, family. These are the factors that determine whether a person returning home from prison will succeed or fail as a law-abiding citizen. I knew the guy who was leading this session from CMS. He was a nice enough guy, and he talked about what he knew, which was insulation and aluminum siding and the best kind of roof to put on your house. He talked about interiors, too. I was so disgusted with the BOP's farcical pre-release program that I just shut my eyes and waited for it to be over. One woman raised her hand. Mr. Green, that's cool and all, but I need to find an apartment to rent. Can you talk a little bit about how to get an apartment? And if there are any programs we could qualify for, affordable housing and stuff? Someone told me I should go to a homeless shelter. He looked not irritated, but unsure. Yeah, well, I don't really know too much about that. The best way to find an apartment is in the paper, or there are websites now that you can search. I wondered how big the BOP's budget for re-entry was. I stared intently at Larry across the card table. He looked worn out, with deep dark circles under his eyes. I remembered something Yoga Janet had said to me about our boyfriends. They do the time with us. Every visit now focused on a single topic, me coming home. It didn't matter if it was Larry, my mother, my brother, or a friend. Among my people there was a collective sigh of relief, a feeling that we were almost out of the woods. I didn't want to be a killjoy, so I tried to hold my sense of dread about the possibility of Chicago in check. It seemed like half the people in the visiting room would be going home soon. Pop, Delicious, Doris, Sheena. Big Boo Clemens had gone home after Thanksgiving, and her girlfriend Trina had taken to her bed for a week. Camilla was going too, but not home yet. The camp was about to send another group down the hill to the drug program, and she was among them. Nina was supposed to come back in January, having completed the program before being released. I hoped that I would see her before I left. I sat in Camilla's cube, watching her sort through her stuff. She had just given me a pair of big black work boots. The drug program was very strict, and she had to dispose of contraband before she went, and give away excess clothing. Camilla was in a good mood. The drug program would cut her sentence by a year, from 7 to 6. I worried about her mouth. More than most of the women in the camp, Camilla would talk back to the guards if they made her mad, and she had a temper. The program was strict, and people got kicked out of it all the time. I'm going to miss you. Who will I do yoga with? She smiled. You're going home. Tomorrow almost. Camilla, you have to promise me you will bite your tongue down there. It's no joke. She made a perplexed face at me. Bite my tongue? Why would I do that? Bite your tongue, it's an expression. It means you can't talk shit to the officers down there, even if they're like Welch or that asshole Richards. True to his word, Officer Richards was doing his best to make everyone's life miserable in the camp. If DeSimon had reminded me of a lost detachable penis, Richards was like a furious one. He was ludicrously angry. He always looked like his shiny, bright pink head might explode at any moment. He was petty, refusing to give a prisoner her letters if she had not been present at mail call, and rigidly enforcing the TV hours, much to the displeasure of the insomniacs. I didn't care about most of his new sheriff activities, although Pop was bitter about having foot massages only when he was not on duty. But he had one habit so evil that I wished debilitating illness would befall him. He screamed on the mic, all the time. The PA system was wired throughout the entire building, with multiple loudspeakers in all the dorms. These were hung just feet from some women's beds, and he would get on the PA and just scream invective at us all evening long at painful volume. Poor Jay's bunk was right under a speaker. Pipes, you think you can bring your electric skills over here? That was something I was not confident I could do or get away with, without electrocuting myself or going to the SHU. So we all had to listen to his abuse, and the word torture took on new meaning. As Christmas Day neared, Larry delivered the bad news from my lawyer. I would be called as a witness to Chicago. I felt ill. What if I missed my halfway house date? Actually, there was no question that I was going to miss my halfway house date. Right down to the wire, my past would get in the way of my freedom. And what if I saw Nora? No way were they summoning me and not calling her. I was nervous, but no one noticed. The camp was in the midst of holiday mania. It had been building since before Thanksgiving, but now it burst out in force with a team of prisoners busy preparing for the annual Christmas decoration contest. Every unit in the FCI competed. There were a dozen units down in the prison, and the camp was considered one unit. Leftover decorations from previous years were already hung around the camp, giant signs that proclaimed Noel and peace in dingy red and white tissue. But the 2004 decorating crew had something new, something big up their khaki sleeves. They toiled in secret, hour after hour in an off-limits television room that had been officially commandeered for them. All we got a glimpse of were the strange papier-mâché creatures they were preparing. "Check out my faggot elf," one volunteer boasted happily, showing me an odd little humanoid. The day before Christmas, the camp decorating crew's handiwork was revealed. It was, frankly, incredible. They had transformed a dingy beige television room with gray linoleum floors into a dazzling Christmas village on a winter night. The particle board ceiling was concealed by an inky blue starry night sky. A village was spread out as if in a mountain valley. And the workshops, the bar room, even the carousel were populated by little elves of debatable sexual preference. They frolicked in sparkling snow that drifted across the linoleum. Everything twinkled. Awestruck, we all examined the handiwork with glee. I still have no idea how they pulled it off. We waited nervously all afternoon for the judging to come down. When the verdict was made public, for the first time ever, the camp was victorious. The guards assured us that the competition had been stiff. Down on the compound, the puppy program was housed in Unit 9, which also included the psych unit, and they had fashioned antlers for all the Labrador retrievers and created a herd of reindeer. A herd of reindeer. A special screening of Elf, with free popcorn to boot, was the entire camp's prize. Faith, my bunkie, surprised me in our cube. "Piper, do you want to watch Elf together?" I was taken aback. Assuming things went as they always did, I would be watching the movie with Pop, or maybe with the Italian twins. But it was clearly important to Faith. "Sure, bunkie, that would be cool." The movie was being screened in a different room than was typical, with several showings. Faith and I got our popcorn, grabbed 2 good seats, and settled in to watch together. We would not be making Christmas cookies or picking out the perfect tree to decorate or kissing the people we loved under mistletoe. But Faith could claim her special place in my life, and I had one in hers, especially at Christmas time. And it was cool. On December 27th, people got their Sunday New York Times in the Monday mail. I sidled up to Lombardi and asked, "Hey, could I have the styles section?" I scurried up to my bunk with the paper. Larry had a piece in it, and not just any piece. It was the Modern Love column, the weekly personal essay about love and relationships. He had been working on it for a long time, and I knew it was about our long-delayed decision to get married. Other than that, I had no idea what the Times readers and I had in store. He described with great humor our untraditional courtship and why neither of us really thought it was important to get married, although we'd been to 27 weddings together. But something had changed. There was never a tipping point, no eureka moment when I realized that doing the most traditional thing possible was a good idea. Some guys say they know immediately, she's the one. Not me. Whether it's a sweater or software, it takes some time for me to know if I want to keep something. One reason I always save receipts. I can't say there was an instance when I looked into the pale blue eyes of the girl I met over corned beef hash at a cafe in San Francisco and thought, this is it. Now, after 8 years, I know. When did I know? Was it the way she helped me deal with the death of my grandfather? The relief I felt when she finally answered her cell phone on September 11th, that great hike in Point Reyes, because she sobbed with joy when the Sox finally won, the way my nephews greet her like a rock star when she walks into the room. Perhaps I should have known right from the start, that morning in the middle of our cross-country trip, when she required one last stop at Arthur Bryant's in Kansas City for a half slab of ribs for breakfast, and 10 minutes into the feast saying to me, "Hey, baby, why don't you pop open a beer?" Or did I not truly know until 7 years later when we found ourselves forced apart for more than a year? Who can say? It's the big moments, maybe, but it's the little moments as much or even more. I could, of course, conjure up every one of those instances in perfect detail, right down to the chewy tang of those ribs and how good that beer had tasted. Slowly, as ever, yet indeed as sure as it gets, it dawned on me. She wants to get married. And if that's true, then I want to get married. To her. This is perhaps the least original idea I've had in a long time, but I needed to get here myself on my own terms. And after all these years, one thing I actually had going for me was the element of surprise. So what the hell? Let's do it. I still don't believe marriage is the only path to happiness or completeness as a person, but it's the right thing for us. So I asked her. Or, more accurately, what I said, sitting next to her on that silly island in a scene straight out of Bride's magazine, was something about love and commitment and not going anywhere, and here's these rings I got you, and if you want to actually make it official, that's cool, and if you don't, that's cool too. And if you want to have a wedding, I'm into it, and if you don't, who needs it? She's still unclear what I was asking exactly, but when she got done laughing, she said yes. And then she threw off her clothes and jumped in the water. My friends joke that I've been to 27 weddings and now it's finally time for one funeral, for my singlehood. Which is sad, like any funeral, sure, but this death is no tragic accident. I look at it more like euthanasia I'm performing on myself. A mercy killing. I'm ready, babe. Pull the plug. Even here, without him, I couldn't imagine any sweeter Christmas present. I always found New Year's Eve a bore on the outside, but on the inside it held greater interest, and I was very conscious and grateful that it would be my only one at Danbury. It made sense that turning the calendar forward would make a prisoner feel more optimistic. Watching those numbers tick suggested progress. Much more than any New Year, even the millennium, it felt for me like something was coming to a definitive end. Pop cried as we counted down at midnight. It was her 13th New Year's in prison, and her last. As I watched her, I tried to imagine the conflicting rush of emotions when you considered so much survival, regret, resilience, and lost time. It seemed like half the camp was focused on getting Pop home in one piece. She was supposed to be finished working in the dining hall. Weirdly, prisoners do earn and accumulate vacation days in the BOP, but she didn't even make it one day. I caught her back in the kitchen and had a fit, but she just told me to go fuck myself. She didn't know what to do with herself if she wasn't working. The funny, salty, heavily accented Earth Mother who had helped me through so much was a bundle of nerves. She was less than 2 weeks from leaving for the halfway house. So I felt terrible when I got the call on January 3rd. "Kerman, pack out!" Packing out meant you packed up your shit because you were going somewhere. The prisoner is provided with Army-issue duffel bags to temporarily hold her possessions. I elected to give most of my accumulated treasures away. My hot pink contraband toenail polish, my prized white men's pajamas that Pop had given to me, my army green jacket, and even my precious headset radio. All my books went into the prison library. Given my secrecy until this point, my fellow prisoners were surprised by my impending departure. Some assumed I had won early release. But those who heard that I was going on Con Air were full of curiosity, concern, and advice. Wear a sanitary pad. They won't always let you use the bathroom, so try not to drink anything. I know you're picky about food, Piper, but eat whatever you can, because it might be the last edible meal you get for a while. When they shackle you, try to flex your wrists so there's a little more room. And if you try to catch the marshal's eye when he's chaining you, maybe he won't cuff you so tight your circulation goes. Oh, and double up your socks so the restraints don't make your ankles bleed. Pray they don't send you through Georgia. They stick you in a county jail, and it's the worst place I've ever been in my life. There are tons of cute guys on the airlift. They will love you. I went to talk to the Marlboro man. Mr. King, they're shipping me out on a writ to Chicago. I actually succeeded in making him look surprised. Then he laughed. Diesel therapy. What? Around here we call the airlift diesel therapy. I had no idea what he was talking about. Well, you take care of yourself. Mr. King, if I come back before my release date, can I have my job back? Sure. As it turned out, I didn't get shipped out for 2 days. I called Larry one last time. Other prisoners had warned me not to say anything about the details of prison travel over the phone. They're listening, and if you give specifics, sometimes they think that you're planning to escape. Larry was bizarrely chipper, and I felt like he didn't really understand what was happening, even though I told him I might not be able to talk to him for a long time. I bade goodbye to Pop. My Piper, you're not supposed to go before me. I hugged her and told her she was going to be fine in the halfway house, and that I loved her. Then I walked down the hill and began my next misadventure. Chapter 17. Diesel Therapy. Like much airline travel these days, flying Con Air involved a lot of stewing in your own juices. Exactly 11 months since I had first set foot in R&D, I was brought back there, and I waited. One by one, guards brought other women in to wait with me. A skinny, dreamy-eyed white girl, a pair of Jamaican sisters, an unpleasant hick from the camp whom I worked with in CMS and who was headed back to western Pennsylvania for a court case, a big, dykey-looking black woman with a wicked scar that began somewhere behind her ear, wound around her neck, and disappeared down below the collar of her T-shirt. There was little talking. Finally, a prison guard whom I knew from the camp appeared. Ms. Welch was a food service officer and knew Pop very well. I felt some measure of relief that she would be involved in our departure, much better than the guard who had welcomed me to Danbury. She issued us all new uniforms, the same khaki hospital scrubs and wussy canvas shoes I had been clad in upon arrival. I was sad to give up my steel toes, even though they already had cracks in the soles. One by one, she began to shackle us. Chains around the waist, handcuffs that were then chained to your waist, and ankle cuffs with a foot of chain between them. I had never been cuffed in my life outside my boudoir. I thought about the fact that I had absolutely no choice in the matter. I was going to be shackled whether I was cooperative, disgruntled, or prone with a knee in the small of my back or a boot on my chest. I looked at Miss Welch as she approached me. "How are you doing, Kerman?" she asked. She sounded genuinely concerned, and I flashed on the fact that we were theirs, being sent out into the great unknown. She knew what the next few hours held for me, but the rest was probably as much of a mystery to her as it was to me. "Okay," I answered in an uncharacteristically small voice. I was scared, but not of her. She started to chain me up, chatting in a distracting way, almost like a dental hygienist who knows she is doing something that causes discomfort. "How is that? Too tight?" "A little too tight on this wrist. Yes." I hated the gratitude in my voice, but it was genuine. We had all been packed out. All of our personal belongings had been gone through by a prison guard, in my case, the same sneering midget I had encountered on my first day, and stored. The only thing you were allowed to bring on the airlift with you was a single sheet of paper that listed your property. On the back, I had written all my important information, my lawyer's phone number and the addresses of my family and friends. Also scrawled on the paper in many handwritings was the contact information for my friends in the camp, and if they were due to go home soon, a street address. If they were down for a long time, their inmate registration number. It hurt to look at the list. I wondered if I would ever see any of these women again. I kept the paper in the breast pocket of my scrubs vest with my ID. We were lined up and started to shuffle, clinking, out of the building toward a big, unmarked bus that was used for prisoner transport. When your legs are chained together, you are forced to adopt a short, tippy-toe cadence. As we were waiting in one of the chain-link fence chambers between the prison and the bus, the town driver's van came speeding up. Jay hopped out, with duffel bags. The big black dyke perked up. "Cuz?" Jay blinked in disbelief. "Slice? What the hell is going on?" "Fuck if I know." We were all herded back into the FCI so they could pack Jay out and truss her up. She was joining our motley little crew, and I was really glad to have a friend along for the ride. Finally, at gunpoint, we were loaded onto the bus and headed into the outside world. It was disorienting to see suburban Connecticut rushing by, eventually giving way to the highway. I had no idea where we were heading, though the odds were on Oklahoma City, the hub of the federal prison transport system. Jay caught up with Slice, her actual cousin, on the bus. Neither of them would cop to knowing why they were being transported, but they were probably co-defendants, as the guard had been concerned that they should have extra restraints. No, we cousins. We love each other," they protested. The guard had also indicated that they were headed to Florida, which was most worrisome. "Piper, I don't know shit about Florida. I'm from the Bronx. I've been to Milwaukee, and that's it," declared Jay. "No fucking reason I should be going to Florida unless they be taking us to Disney World." We finally arrived at what seemed like an abandoned industrial vacant lot. The bus stopped, and there we sat for hours. If you think that it is impossible to sleep in shackles, I am here to prove you wrong. They gave us chicken sandwiches, and I had to help the Pennsylvania hick eat. The guard had not been as kind to her as to me and had chained her tightly and put her in an extra black box restraint that immobilized her thumbs, this to protect her co-defendant, a woman with whom she was now excitedly gossiping. Finally, the bus rumbled to life and pulled onto a huge tarmac. We had company. There were at least a half-dozen other transport vehicles, another bus, unmarked vans and sedans, all idling in the cold winter dusk. And then, quite suddenly, an enormous 747 landed, taxied briefly, and then pulled up among the vehicles. In a moment, I recognized that I was in the midst of the most cliched action thriller, as jack-booted marshals with submachine guns and high-powered rifles swarmed the tarmac, and I was one of the villains. First they unloaded about a dozen prisoners from the plane, men in a variety of shapes, sizes, colors, and attires. Some of them appeared to be wearing paper jumpsuits, not the best deal in the biting January wind. Disheveled and cold, they seemed pretty interested in our little group huddled next to the Danbury bus. Then the armed figures were shouting at us over the wind to line up, with plenty of room between each of us. We performed the tarmac jig that is done when one is trying to move as quickly as possible against restraints. After a rough pat-down, a female marshal checked my hair and my mouth for weapons, and the hop was on to the stairs up to the plane. On board were more marshals, enormous beefy men and a handful of weathered-looking women in navy blue uniforms. As we clinked and clanked into the passenger seating area, we were greeted by a wave of testosterone. The plane was packed with prisoners, all of whom appeared to be male. Most of them were very, very happy to see us. Some were making a lot of noise, declaring what they would like to do to us, offering critiques as we shuffled up the aisle as directed by the marshals. "Don't you look at them!" the marshals shouted at us. Clearly they had calculated that it was much easier to focus control on the behavior of a dozen females than on 200 males. "What are you scared of, Blondie? They can't do anything to you," shouted the male prisoners. "Over here, Blondie!" They were proven wrong in my mind later in the trip, when a big man rose from his seat, loudly protesting that he needed a bathroom, and the marshals promptly tasered him. He flopped around like a fish. Con Air is like a layer cake of the federal prison system. Every sort of prisoner is represented. Sad-looking middle-aged upper-class white men, their wire-rimmed glasses sometimes askew or broken. Proud cholos looking vaguely Mayan and covered in gang markings. White women with bleached-out hair and very bad orthodontia. Skinhead types with swastika tattoos on their faces. Young black men with their hair bushed out because they had been forced to undo their cornrows. A skinny white father and son pair, obvious because they were the spitting image of each other. A towering black man in extra heavy restraints who might be the most imposing figure I have ever seen. And, of course, me. When I was escorted for a bathroom break, difficult to manage when one's wrists are chained to one's waist, in addition to lascivious invitations and threatening catcalls, I was treated to more than one, "What you doing here, Blondie?" I was feeling more positively about everyone's shackles. I was so glad that Jay was next to me, craning her head to see everything, too. Still, it was unnerving that she and her cousin didn't know what legal proceeding they were headed toward. We all agreed that if, God forbid, they had caught another case, been charged with another crime, they should have been told. But maybe not. They didn't have high-end representation like me. Con Air does not fly direct. The jumbo airliners act more like puddle jumpers, stopping hither and yon to pick up convicts being transported all over the country for all kinds of reasons. Court appearances, facility transfers, post-sentencing designation. Some prisoners appeared to be fresh off the street, still in civilian clothes. They brought on a Spanish guy with long black hair who would have resembled Jesus were his face not so hard. He was so good-looking it was like a kick in the gut. At one stop, more women got on. One of them paused in the aisle, waiting for a marshal to tell her where to sit. She was a scrawny little white woman, missing teeth, with a cloud of hair that was an indeterminate shade somewhere between gray and peroxide. She looked like a woebegone yard chicken, like she had led a hard life. As she stood there, some wise ass called out, "Crack kills!" and half the plane, which must have contained some crack dealers, busted out laughing. Her homely face fell. It was like the meanest thing you ever saw on the schoolyard. At about 8 p.m., we landed in Oklahoma City. I believe that the Federal Transfer Center sits at the edge of the airport there, but I can't be completely sure, as I never saw the outside world. The planes taxi right up to the prison to unload their heavily tattooed cargo. By default and necessity, it is a maximum security facility that houses many prisoners during the course of their airlift experiences. Until I reached Chicago, this would be my new quarters. We arrived at our new unit hours later, approximately 20 exhausted women who were issued sheets, pajamas, and small packets of hygienic necessities, and ushered into a triangular cavern lined with 2 tiers of cells. It was darkened and deserted, because its inhabitants were already in lockdown. The CO was a ferocious 6-foot Native American woman who barked out our cell assignments. I had never been in an actual cell before, let alone locked in with a cellie. I crept into my assigned spot, about 6 by 12 feet with a bunk bed, a toilet, a sink, and a desk bolted to the wall. I could see in the dim fluorescent light that someone was asleep in the top bunk. She rolled over and gave me the eye, then rolled away and went back to sleep. I crawled in and dozed off, grateful to have running water and free range of movement. Thudding, shouting, and my cellmate vaulting out of her bunk awakened me. "Breakfast," she said over her shoulder, disappearing. I got up and stepped cautiously out of the cell, wearing the washed-out hospital green pajamas I had been given the night before. Women were scurrying from the numbered cells to get into line on the other side of the unit. Not one of them was in her pajamas. I hurried to get back into yesterday's nasty clothes and headed toward the line. After receiving a plastic box, I located Jay and Slice, who had claimed a table near my cell. Our boxes contained dry cereal, a packet of instant coffee, a packet of sugar, and a clear plastic bag of milk that struck me as one of the strangest things I had ever seen. But when you mix the coffee powder with the milk and sugar in a green plastic mug and put it in the unit microwave, an ancient contraption that looked like it belonged on a Lost in Space episode, it tasted okay. I pretended that it was cappuccino. "We're going to starve," Slice declared. Jay and I feared she was right. We discussed our predicament, and Slice, who was a hungry woman of action, departed on a recon mission. Jay and I retreated to our respective cells. I finally got a formal introduction to my new bunkie. "What's your name?" she drawled. I introduced myself. She was Lakeisha from Atlanta, and on her way to Danbury. The minute she heard I was coming from Danbury, she had a million questions. Then she crawled back into her bed and went to sleep. I soon discovered that Lakeisha slept about 22 hours a day, getting up 3 times to eat and, mercifully, shower. She always looked disheveled, though, emerging from our cell with her twists sticking out in all directions. "People, what's wrong with your bunkie? She looks like Celie in the color purple," cracked Slice. I was totally wired on my first day in Oklahoma City. It was a brand-new scenario to get the hang of, with all new rituals and routines. Unfortunately, there was absolutely nothing to do. There were 3 TV rooms without chairs, and one little rolling bookshelf filled with a bizarre assortment of volumes, Christian books, ancient copies of John D. MacDonald, Shakespeare's Antony and Cleopatra, a handful of romances, and 2 Dorothy L. Sayers novels. A weird structure in the middle of the unit looked like a reception desk and contained nothing but stubby little pencils and various forms of scrap paper. Next to 3 payphones, there was an outdoor room where smokers shivered, and you could see a slice of the sky over a partial wall topped with razor wire. The unit felt like a train or bus station, but without a newsstand or a coffee shop. I tried to use the payphone to call Larry or my parents to tell them I was alive, but the phone would place only collect calls, and no one's phone service would accept them, which intensified the feeling that I had been dropped into a plane of being that didn't exist to the rest of the world. Women came and went quietly. The place was subdued and spotlessly clean. The unit seemed to be at most half full, maybe 60 women in the breakfast line. At 11 a.m., the CO brought in large rolling carts, signaling that lunch was going to be served. I watched a woman emerge from a cell on the top tier and descend the stairs on the opposite side of the unit. That curly hair, that fireplug shape, glasses. Something stirred in my belly. I sat up very straight. What was Nora Jansen doing in here with me? I had been certain that a separation order would be placed on my co-defendants and me, but apparently I was wrong. I stared at her as she got in the chow line. "Come on, Peepa," Slice nudged me to get my lunch. Despite her obvious misgivings about befriending skinny white girls, she was willing to accept me as Jay's buddy, especially given that I didn't eat much. I trailed behind my 2 companions, drawing a bead on the woman who I thought was Nora. In the past 11 months, I had occasional thoughts of Nora. Bad thoughts. I wanted to be certain before I made my move. I had fantasized about confronting the woman I'd followed down the wrong path, the woman who had likely ratted me out. In my head, I usually set the moment in a lesbian bar in San Francisco. and imagined much smashing of bottles with pool cues and breaking of pug noses and general bloodletting. Now the real moment had arrived. What was I going to do? The short, curly-headed, and decidedly middle-aged woman received her lunchbox and turned to head to a table. It was the same woman I had followed to Indonesia, to Zurich, to the Congress Hotel. If I had never met her, I wouldn't be sitting here now holding a bag of lukewarm milk and wearing government clothing. It was the same French bulldog face 10 years later. 10, apparently, long, hard years. She looked like hell. She glanced at me as she passed, and I saw the shock of recognition cross those flattened features. I held my breath, my pulse pounding. At the table with my companions, I hissed, "Jay, I think I see one of my co-defendants." Jay looked at me, very serious. Almost all drug prisoners have co-defendants, and that can have a host of meanings. But Jay knew immediately from my tone that this was not a good thing. "What's up?" asked Slice, catching that there was a problem. "Piper thinks she got one of her co-defendants here, and she's surprised." "Where?" I indicated without pointing. They relaxed a little. "That old lady? Shit, Piper. What kind of gangster is you, anyway?" I glared at them. "Jay, I think that bitch ratted me out." All levity ceased. Slice studied Nora. Jay thought for several moments, then spoke deliberately. "Piper, you do what you need to do, know what I'm saying? But know this. You will be in the SHU the rest of the time here. If it sucks like this here, imagine what the SHU is like. And fuck knows what else is gonna happen to you. You about to go home to your man who you know loves you. He got his ass up to the visiting room every damn week. Is that bitch worth it to catch another case? I'm gonna back you up to a point. I'm telling you for real, though, I am not going to the SHU. But I respect that you got to do what you need to." Slice piped in. "I'm not going to the SHU either. Not for some white girl I don't even know. No offense, Piper. But do your thing." I did nothing. Jay kept a worried eye on me. Slice procured a full deck of playing cards from another prisoner and began to shuffle them. I couldn't stand it, though. I took a break and lay on my bunk and stared at the cinder block wall. The woman who had landed me here was finally within my grasp, and I was paralyzed. Would I really do nothing? I left my cell and stalked around the unit, which took about 3 minutes. Nora was nowhere to be found. Jay gestured me over. "Come on, Piper, play with us." Jay and her cousin riffed back and forth as we played cards. Slice was full of very funny accounts about the life of a bulldagger on the make in the FCI back in Danbury, including the story of being caught in the act in the middle of the night by a guard we all knew. "I froze, man. He's got his flashlight on us, and it wasn't the kind of situation where you can deny. Know what I mean? And he just said, 'Let me watch.' So?" And she indicated getting back to business. It was the same guy who had bird-dogged me for giving Pop an innocent foot massage. Filthy pig. By the time the dinner cart showed up after the 4 o'clock count, we were laughing our asses off. When we took the lid off the plastic trays, the stench made us slam them back on immediately. Jay spoke up after a beat. "We gonna have to kill one of these bitches and eat her, or starve." I was crossing the unit to return my tray when I saw Nora headed toward me. I squared my shoulders and adopted my most Arctic Ice Queen stare. As we passed, she looked at me uncertainly. "Hi," she said almost under her breath. I stalked by her. "What happened?" asked Jay, concerned. "Tried to say hello to me." I shook my head and we started playing cards again. "You know, the thing is, I can't figure out why she's here and her sister isn't." "Her sister?" "Yeah, her sister is my co-defendant, too. She's doing time in Kentucky." The next morning at breakfast, there was Hester. That was the way it was in Oklahoma. New people materialized in the middle of the night while you were locked down in the cells. They popped up at breakfast, a day-making novelty. I witnessed the sisters' reunion from my turf. They hugged ecstatically and headed to a corner to confer. My companions took note. "You need to kill Sis, too?" asked Slice. "Nah, I never had any beef with Hester. She's all right." Time had been kinder to Hester. She looked more or less the same, perhaps due to her old chicken bone charms, long reddish curly hair, a faraway but quizzical expression, and a witchy, mystical demeanor. For the weeks that we spent in Oklahoma City, I refused to acknowledge the sisters' presence. Mac's lockdown was torturous in its monotony and lack of stimulation. The hours and the days crawled by. Flights arrived and departed almost every day, but you never knew when you might be put on one. It was the perfect realization of limbo, departure from one realm of being, waiting to arrive at another. Oklahoma City made me homesick for the Danbury camp, a surreal and disturbing feeling. I was accustomed to hours of strenuous activity every day, between working construction, running, and the gym. Here, the only options were push-ups and yoga in my cell and walking the tiers, actually circling the tiers hundreds of times in my canvas slippers until my blisters bled. Back in Danbury, Sister Platy had used the hall as a makeshift treadmill during inclement weather. I would sometimes fall into step next to her. She moved pretty fast for a 69-year-old, and her constant good spirits amazed me. "How are you holding up, dear?" the little nun would ask me. I was lucky to have Jay by my side to share the stress and uncertainty and to blow off steam. And her cousin was funny as hell and a reassuring, if also menacing, presence. I asked Jay one day about her cousin's scar. "A guy jumped her, tried to rape her, and he cut her with a box cutter. 100 stitches. Pause. "He's in jail now." "And the nickname?" "It's her favorite drink." It was easy to lose track of what day it was. There were no newspapers, no magazines, no mail, and since I avoided the TV rooms, no significant way to tell one day from the next. You can only play so many games of gin. I tried to count off which day was January 12th, when Pop would be released from Danbury. I couldn't talk to Larry on the payphone, and there were no clear windows, so I couldn't even watch the progression of the sun. I wasn't remotely interested in messing with prison pussy, one of the only available distractions. I learned dominoes, and I learned to understand the true punishment of repetition without reward. How could anyone do significant amounts of time in a setting like this without losing their mind? No one was all that inclined to be social with strangers, but some limited intrigue took place around cigarettes. In Danbury, the opportunities for hustle were many. But in Oklahoma City, the only things on the market were sex, other people's psych meds, and, most important, nicotine. Prisoners who volunteered as orderlies got to shop, but all there was to buy were cigarettes. Once a week, when the cigarettes got doled out, there would be frenzy right below the surface, threatening to bust out. The orderlies were either companionable and split their cigs up into smaller rollies to be shared out of the milk of human kindness, or were paid in psych meds, which would help you sleep away the days like Lakeisha. I found the whole deal completely stressful and was glad I didn't smoke. My hair was turning into a rat's nest absent conditioner. All we had were little packets of shampoo. Finally, I turned to scavenging packets of mayonnaise, which made my locks greasy, but at least I could get a prison-issue little black plastic comb through it. Suddenly, Jay and Slice got shipped out. At 4 a.m., Jay and I said goodbye through the thick glass rectangle in my door. "Stick next to Slice," I said. "I'll track you down after I get home." Jay fixed me with her huge liquid brown eyes, sweet and sad and scared. "Be careful, Piper," she said, "and remember the Vaseline trick I told you." "I will." I waved goodbye through the inches of glass. When they let us out for breakfast 2 hours later, I felt truly alone, left to navigate the seas myself. I missed my girls, and I glared across the unit in Nora's direction. I knew that whatever my immediate future held, it included her. A few days later, my bunkie Lakeisha left for Danbury. I was jealous. As she was scrambling into her clothes, I instructed her, "When you get to the camp, tell Tony, that's the town driver, that you saw Piper in Oklahoma City and she's okay. She says hello." Okay, wait. Who is Piper? Why wasn't I surprised? I sighed. Just tell them you met a white girl who does yoga from Danbury and she's all right. That I can remember. I had a couple of days of total privacy in the cell. I cycled through my yoga poses repeatedly, gazing at the opaque window that let some daylight in. It was the full height of the room and about 6 inches wide. I would save my bag of milk at breakfast and put it at the bottom of the window, where it stayed cold for hours. The milk was the one guaranteed edible thing every day. I also learned to sleep against the wall with my arm shielding my eyes from the fluorescent light that was on in the strange cell 24 hours a day. For the first time, I had a bottom bunk, a strange novelty. Then a new bunkie showed up, a young Spanish girl. She was from Texas, on her way to a prison in Florida. She had never been down before, was wide-eyed and full of questions. I played the role of seasoned prisoner and told her what I thought she could expect. She reminded me of Maria Carbone from Room 6 and the construction shop, which made me sad. Finally, a week later, there was a thud on my door at 4 a.m. "Kerman, pack out!" I had no possessions to pack other than my now crinkled paper from Danbury with its scribbled reminders of the people I knew there. I practically danced into my khaki uniform, at this point ready for anything that would get me out of there, Nora or no Nora. Per Jay's instructions, I fished my precious contraband store of Vaseline out of its hiding place in a sock and tucked gobs of it into the curves of my ears. During the long hours of travel on the flight, largely without water, I could dab it on my lips to keep them from cracking. As I shuffled onto the airplane, shackled again, one of the feds who had also been on my previous flight stared at me. "What's wrong, Blondie?" I was stone-faced. "You better improve your attitude, Blondie," he advised sharply. The marshals made me sit next to Nora on the plane. At this point, I wasn't even surprised at my bad fortune, though I was rigid with fury. Shackled, with Vaseline in my ears, and sitting next to the cow who got me into the whole mess, I refused to look at her. We maintained a wall of uncomfortable silence between us as the flight stopped in Terre Haute, Detroit, and other snow-covered Midwestern wastelands. At least I had the window seat. Descending into a sunny, wintry Chicago, I felt, despite my extreme agitation and acute physical discomfort, a quiet thrill. I retained a tiny shred of humor with which to appreciate the irony of the whole situation. Here was the city that was the hub of this whole mess, and it seemed somehow fitting that I should be here with her next to me. The tarmac in Chicago was lively and bitterly cold. I was freezing in my thin khakis. Convicts were hopping every which way in shackles under the direction of the marshals, and Nora and Hester grew excited at the sight of one floppy-haired white boy. "It's George!" they exclaimed. I looked closely as he turned our way and cheerfully indicated greeting with his chin before being hustled onto a bus. If that was Hester's old friend, George Freud, he had lost some weight in 10 years. It seemed that the whole gang was being recalled to Chi-Town for the big event of Jonathan Bibby's trial. We were loaded into a passenger van with a bunch of guys and whisked downtown through rush-hour traffic in a phalanx of unmarked and heavily secured white vehicles. Hester was seated next to me, and she gazed into my eyes intently for a moment. "Are you doing all right?" she asked very genuinely, in her flat Midwestern tone. I muttered that I was okay and looked out the window, unnerved by her kindness. As we headed into the loop, I tried to anticipate how best to handle myself at the Chicago Metropolitan Correctional Center, aka Federal Jail, where people are typically held before their cases are resolved, unless, like Lil' Kim, they do all their time there. Jay had been locked up in the Brooklyn MCC for 2 years before coming to Danbury, and had described that situation as far better than what we experienced in Oklahoma City. 2 units in Brooklyn, about 200 females, and you could have a job and everything. There was stuff to do. In Chicago MCC, you'll be able to fade back, hook up with someone normal, and just lay low, probably even get in a different unit or dorm than your co-defendants. We were driven into the base of a tall, triangular fortress on a city block in the crowded Chicago loop. Unloaded from the van, shuffled into an elevator, we were deposited in a filthy, decrepit, and disorganized R&D. The building was disorienting. The floor felt tiny and even more constricting because it was cluttered. It was lined with holding cells, populated by men in orange, most of them brown-skinned. We were quickly locked into an empty holding cell, also filthy. During the next 5 hours, I paced the cell and tried to ignore the sisters. They were polite and did not say much, seeming to give deference to my coiled, stymied rage. After several hours, I was lying prone on a hard, narrow bench, practicing nothingness, and Nora cleared her throat. "Piper?" "What? Do you even know Jonathan Bibby?" "No." Several moments passed in silence. "You must be pissed." "Yeah." A female guard issued us ill-fitting orange men's jumpsuits. Mine snapped up the front and had short sleeves and weirdly cropped legs, like convict clam diggers. I had almost made it through the year without lapsing into total cliché, but had now missed the mark. Finally, it seemed that they would escort us to our resting place for the night. I was so goddamn tired, I assumed anything would be an improvement over this filthy, uncomfortable cell, especially if it was far away from Nora. The 3 of us rode in silence up in the elevator to the 12th floor. We exited through the clanging security gates, until the last gate slid open to reveal the women's unit. Psych ward. That was my overwhelming first impression. Dueling televisions blared at opposite sides of the small room. A cacophony of voices vibrated in the close, crowded space. Women, disheveled and stooped, blinked at us like moles. Although there was nothing playful about the place, it had an infantilized nursery school vibe. As we entered, everything seemed to stand still and every eye turned to us. A guard in an ill-fitting uniform who telegraphed ineffectual approached us. He seemed utterly surprised by our arrival. I turned and looked at Nora and Hester, and then I started to laugh, a disbelieving and desperate laugh. In an instant, the iceberg between me and my co-defendants melted. "Oh, hell no!" And they laughed too, with relief and recognition, and I saw the same look of disbelief mixed with disgust and exhaustion in their eyes. They were in the same boat as me, and right here and now, all of a sudden, I knew that they were all I had. Most changes in perception are gradual. We grow to hate or love an idea, a person, or a place over a period of time. I had certainly nursed a hatred of Nora Jensen over many years, placing much of the blame for my situation on her. This was not one of those instances. Sometimes, rarely, the way we see something is subject to alchemy. My emotions changed so rapidly, and I felt so strongly all the things I had in common with these 2 women. There was no way not to take immediate notice and stock of what was happening. Our troubled history was suddenly matched by our more immediate shared experience as prisoners on an exhausting journey. We huddled together for a moment while chaos reigned around us. And it occurred to me that they probably knew nothing at all about the last 10 years of my life, including the very fact that I was incarcerated. They had both gone to prison before me. And that's how we broke the ice. Is Kentucky like this? I asked Hester. Nope. Dublin? Hell no. Where are you? Danbury, and it's nothing like this freak show. The officer reappeared, with housing assignments. We were shown to our respective cells and locked down. My new roommate, Virginia, weighed 350 pounds and snored like nothing I had ever heard before. It was like there was a wild, rabid animal in the bunk below me. As I tossed and turned on the plastic mattress, trying to cover my head with the pillow, I realized that this was what Pop meant when she said real prison. As in, you girls don't have any idea what real prison is like. I remembered a college professor who had told me that lack of sleep, or sleep only in short intervals, will eventually bring on hallucinations. Virginia was an amateur astrologer who rarely showered. She informed me that she was planning on defending herself in court. When I refused to tell her my birth date so she could do my chart, she was deeply insulted. I thought of Miss Pat and Miss Philly, two of the more unstable women back in Danbury, and tried to tread very lightly with crazy people. The next day, my initial impression of the unit was confirmed when I realized that a significant percentage of its occupants were under court-ordered psychiatric observation. This was darkly humorous, as the prisoners in Chicago had little to no contact with prison staff or counselors of any stripe. The inmates really seemed to run this asylum. I also gleaned that just about all of the women in Chicago were on pretrial status. Their cases had not yet been resolved, but they did not or could not make bail. So they were captive here while the wheels of justice ground. A couple of them had been here for months without being charged with a crime. This made their lives uncertain on every level, and those who were not already crazy were acting pretty wacko, driven nuts by rage and instability. I had been dropped into a snake pit. Virginia warned me, "See Connie over there?" She indicated a catatonic-looking woman. "She's gonna ask you for your razor. Promise me you won't give it to her. She's only dangerous to herself, don't worry." I promised. None of the accepted rules of prison behavior that I had learned seemed to apply here. There was no welcome wagon with shower shoes and a toothbrush. There was no understanding of inappropriate or verboten questions. There was no sense of solidarity or recognition of the sanity-saving value of personal routine or order or self-respect. God damn it, you couldn't even rely on the tribe system. The white women weren't worth a damn. Most of them were drooling on meds to keep them from killing themselves, or their neighbors. My de facto tribe was Nora and Hester, who was going by her given name of Anne these days. At least they understood the official and unofficial rules of incarceration. Warily, I sat down with them and slowly began to feel out the situation, including what each of us knew about the upcoming trial and exactly why this place was so freaking miserable. They, too, were staggered by how awful the Chicago MCC was. We agreed that it was hard to believe it was a federal facility. There was enormous ground for the three of us to cover just on the prison front, but that wasn't really what I was interested in. I wanted Nora to cop to ratting me out and to tell me why she did it. Finally, we met what passed for the welcome wagon. Crystal. Crystal was a tall, skinny black woman in her 50s and the de facto mayor of the women's unit. She appeared to be perfectly sane and was in charge of issuing uniforms and basics to new arrivals. She led us to a jumbled closet where she began burrowing in boxes for more orange uniforms and some towels. They were short on underpants, and she handed me 2 pairs. I looked at them. "Crystal, these are not clean." "I'm sorry, sweetie, that's all we got. You put 'em in the laundry that goes out tomorrow. They'll probably come back." There were no pajamas for us, no shampoo, not even eating utensils. I was relieved to hear that we could shop commissary once a week. But of course, my ability to do that was going to depend on someone in this building doing their job and completing my paperwork, which seemed like a fantasy. I was thrilled to discover there were 2 private showers, though I was disgusted when I saw them. Before surrendering, I had been warned never, ever to go into the shower without shower shoes. My feet had not touched tile in almost a year, but I had no shoes. I was dying to bathe. I turned on the water and gingerly stepped out of my canvas slippers and into the gross shower stall, holding a little bar of motel soap. My skin crawled, and icy water stung my back as I tried to get clean. Nora was cautious around me, but was almost pathetically grateful that I wasn't outright hostile. I certainly felt entitled to be nasty. When I was, she took it without resistance. Hester/Anne was bemused but didn't interfere. I guess she figured her big sister could fend for herself, or that she had it coming. I learned that Nora had taught in a vocational program they had in Dublin. Hester/Anne was in the puppy program at Lexington. Before she'd been locked up, Hester/Anne had gotten sober, got married, and quietly embraced Jesus as her personal savior. Nora was just as I remembered her, funny, scheming, curious, and sometimes an insufferably egotistical pain in the ass in need of a takedown. Finally, I cut to the chase. So why don't you fill me in on everything that happened after we broke up in 1993? According to Nora, many months after my departure from her life, she did some soul-searching and tried to get out of the business with a lodgee, who told her in no uncertain terms, no dice, and warned her of the consequences if she did walk. "I'll always know where your sister is," he threatened her. A while later, when a pair of drug couriers got arrested, separately in San Francisco and Chicago, things began to get messy and ugly, and of course the whole operation collapsed. With her drug money, Nora had built her dream home in Vermont. Or at least it was her dream until a SWAT team of heavily armed federal agents arrived in jackboots to take her into custody. When the feds sat her down, she claimed, they already had detailed information about the whole enterprise. Someone, I thought probably her slimy business partner Jack, had been singing. "Did they have my name?" I asked. "Yes, they knew exactly who you were. But at first I told them you were just my girlfriend and you didn't know anything." At this point, it was hard to know what to believe. I had invested a lot of time and energy into hating Nora and elaborating fantasies of revenge. Her story was plausible, but it could easily be a lie. I believed that she felt terrible about the mistakes she had made. And when she looked across the table at her little sister, or talked about her elderly parents, who had not 1 but 2 children in prison, I felt bad for her in spite of myself. My brain and my guts were twisted, a snarled cat's cradle that I would have to pick apart. I was starting to understand what the Marlboro Man meant by diesel therapy. Chapter 18. It Can Always Get Worse. Every day in the Chicago MCC began the exact same way. At 6 a.m., male inmates, who were allowed to have jobs, brought food carts up to the women's unit and through the massive metal security doors. Then the lone CO on duty would go around the unit unlocking the female prisoners' doors. When the bolts clicked, everyone would vault out of bed and rush into the unit to stand in line for breakfast. The line was not a happy place. No one spoke, and faces were hard and sad or just stuporific. The food was usually cold cereal and a half-pint of milk, and sometimes bags of bruised apples, handed out by an inmate named Princess. Every now and then there were hard-boiled eggs. It was clear why everyone always got up. As in Oklahoma City, breakfast was the only meal of the day that was guaranteed to be edible. As quickly as everyone had appeared, the room would empty. Almost everyone went back to bed. Sometimes they ate their breakfast, or sometimes they just stashed it. sticking the milk on ice in a scavenged receptacle. The unit would remain quiet for several hours, and then the women would start to stir, the televisions would go on, and another miserable day in the high-rise fortress would begin. Everybody who loved me wanted me to be innocent, tricked, duped, all unawares. But of course, that was not the case. All those years ago, I wanted to have an adventure, an outrageous experience, and the fact of it being illegal made it all the more exciting. Nora may have used me all those years ago, but I had been more than ready to take what she was offering. The women I met in Danbury helped me to confront the things I had done wrong as well as the wrong things I had done. It wasn't just my choice of doing something bad and illegal that I had to own. It was also my lone wolf style that had helped me to make those mistakes and often made the aftermath of my actions worse for those I loved. I no longer thought of myself in the terms that D.H. Lawrence used to observe on our national character. The essential American soul is hard, isolate, stoic, and a killer. It has never yet melted. Women like Allie, Pom-Pom, Pennsatucky, Jay, and Amy melted me. I recognized what I was capable of doing and how my choices affected the people I was now missing. Not only Larry and my family, but all my fellow penitents, whom I had crossed paths with in this year, this season in hell. I had long ago accepted that I had to pay the consequences. I am capable of making terrible mistakes, and I am also prepared to take responsibility for my actions. Yet you still had to resolve not to believe what the prison system, the staff, the rules, even some of the other prisoners wanted you to think about yourself, which was the worst. When you chose to do otherwise, when you acted like you were a person worthy of respect and treated yourself with respect, sometimes they did too. When doubt and shame or worse crept in, the letters and books and visits from friends and lover and family were powerful proof that I was okay, more effective than charms or talismans or pills to fight those terrible feelings. The Chicago MCC was a different story. I had been taken away from all the people who'd helped me to do my time, people on the outside and the inside, and I was completely off balance. The misery of the women surrounding me rattled me, as did the pointlessness of every day that passed here, and the complete disrespect and indifference with which we were treated. The COs who worked the unit were in fact often pleasant, if unprofessional, but they couldn't do anything. Interacting with the institution in Chicago MCC was like staring at a concrete wall. Questions went unanswered. Underpants were not provided. My bedrock sense of myself was in some danger. Food, sometimes edible, was brought on a regular schedule, and in this new universe, that was really all you could count on as a stable principle. My phone calls to Larry and my parents took on a desperate edge. For the first time in the year I had been in prison, I said the words, "You've got to get me out of here." I threatened to drown Nora in a toilet. We had settled into a companionable antagonism, wherein I threatened to kill her several times a day, as we three co-defendants would sit and play cards, reminisce, compare notes on our respective prisons, or just complain. It was very, very strange. I still had overwhelming flashes of hostility toward her, which I did not swallow. I didn't really trust her, but I realized that it didn't matter. Regardless of whether she was honest with me, I wanted to forgive her. It made me feel better about myself, better about the crazy shithole we were currently residing in, and honestly, better about the fact that I was going home soon. She was going to be in prison for many more years. If I could forgive, it meant I was a strong, good person who could take responsibility for the path I had chosen for myself, and all the consequences that accompanied that choice. And it gave me the simple but powerful satisfaction of extending a kindness to another person in a tough spot. It's not easy to sacrifice your anger, your sense of being wronged. I still cautioned Nora regularly that today might be the day she drowned, and she laughed nervously at my mock threats. Sometimes her sister offered to help with the drowning, if Nora was being annoying. But we were able to settle into a feisty rapport, like all ex-lovers who have a lot of water under the bridge but have elected to be friends. The things that I had liked about her over a decade earlier, her humor, her curiosity, her hustle, her interest in the weird and transgressive, all those things were still true. In fact, they had been sharpened by her years in a high-security prison in California. We served each other as a barrier against the freaks, of which this small unit had an astonishing array. In addition to poor suicidal Connie, there were several bipolar arsonists, an angry and volatile bank robber, a woman who had written a letter threatening to assassinate John Ashcroft, and a tiny pregnant girl who would seat herself next to me and start running her hands through my hair, crooning. I saw more temper tantrums and freakouts in a few weeks than I had in many months in Danbury, all of which the CO basically ignored. There was no SHU for women in Chicago. We were one floor above the men's SHU. So the only disciplinary action that could be taken against us was sending a female off to the Cook County Jail, the largest in the nation at 10,000 inmates. "You do not want to go there," warned Crystal, the mayor, who seemed to know what she was talking about. Now that we had been in the MCC for a couple of weeks, the sisters and I saw that there were in fact some sane women present. At first, no one really came near us. It took a while to realize that some of the residents of the 12th floor were scared of us. After all, we three were hardened cons from real prison. But after a bit, they must have recognized that we were normal like them, and then they made eager overtures, a couple of sweet and friendly Spanish mommies, a very short sports fanatic, and a hilarious Chinese lesbian who introduced herself to me hopefully with the line, "I like your body." We were instantly elevated as authorities on anything and everything involving the federal prison system. When we explained that, in fact, real prison was much more bearable than our present surroundings, they were perplexed. They also wanted legal advice, lots of it, and I found myself repeating, "I am not a lawyer, you have to ask your attorney." But all of them had court-appointed lawyers who were rarely accessible. There was a bizarre black bat phone on the wall, which was supposed to tap directly into the public defender's office. "Fat fucking lot of good that does us," complained one of the arsonists. I did not have the representation problems of my fellow prisoners. One day I was called out of the unit, told I was going to court, and sent down to R&D to sit in a holding cell for hours. Finally, I was handed off to my escorts, two big young customs agents, federal cops. I'm not sure what they were expecting, but it wasn't me. When I turned my back to them to be cuffed, the guy doing the honors got rattled. "She's too small. They don't even fit her." He sounded anguished. His counterpart stuck a thick finger between the cuffs and my wrist and said he thought they were good. In the world view of these burly, clean-cut young guys, I was clearly not supposed to be resident in this fortress. I probably looked too much like their sister, their neighbor, or their wife. After being locked away for so many weeks, I enjoyed the ride through the streets of Chicago. At the Federal Building on South Dearborn, I was taken upstairs to a nondescript conference room and deposited, with the less rattled officer to guard me. We sat across the table from each other, in silence, for 15 minutes. I wasn't looking at him, but I could tell he was watching me, which I guess was his job. He seemed to be getting agitated. He shifted in his chair, looked at the clock, looked at me, shifted again. I thought he was just bored. With prison zen, I waited for whatever was going to happen next. Finally, he couldn't stand it anymore. "You know, we all make mistakes," he said. I turned my eyes to him. "I know that," I replied. "What were you, an addict?" "No, I just made a mistake." He was silent for a moment. "You're just so young." This amused me. It must be the yoga. He was definitely younger than me. "My offense is more than 11 years old. I'm 35. His eyebrows shot toward his hairline. He had no idea what to do with this information. Mercifully, the door opened, ending the conversation. It was my lawyer, Pat Cotter, with the assistant U.S. attorney and a roast beef sandwich. "Larry said roast beef was your favorite." I wolfed it down in as ladylike a fashion as I could muster. I had almost forgotten about my orange attire, but now I felt a little self-conscious. He also brought me a root beer. This is what a top-shelf white-shoe criminal defense gets you. I was very happy to see him. Pat explained that because I would appear as a government witness, the AUSA, the woman who had put me in jail, well, actually, that was me, she just prosecuted, got to prepare me. He again reminded me that my plea agreement obligated me to cooperate. He would stay with us, but I had no legal protection per se. Nor was I in any legal risk, as long as I didn't perjure myself. I assured him I had no plans for that, then pressed him about getting me out of the MCC and back to Danbury. He said he would see what he could do. Jonathan Bibby's trial date had already been pushed back twice. I knew that meant fat chance. I was very tired when I got back to our fortress prison. "You'll get your turn," I told Nora and Hester/Anne. We had managed to get moved into a 6-person cell with 3 other women. So now, in addition to everything else, we were roommates. I went to sleep. The biggest problem with the MCC was that there was nothing to do. There was a pathetic pile of crap books, decks of cards, and the infernal televisions, always on, always at full volume. There had been nothing to do in Oklahoma City either, but there the surroundings were spotless and serene, with about 10 times as much space. Mercifully, in Chicago, we received mail, and letters and books began arriving for me. I shared my books with my bunkies. When you are in deep misery, you reach out to those who can help, people who can understand. I picked up a pen and wrote to the only person on the outside who could begin to grasp my situation, my pen pal Joe, the ex-bank robber. He wrote me back immediately. "Dear Piper, got your letter. Thanks for reminding me of how much I hated the Los Angeles Metropolitan Detention Center, MDC. I laughed like a mental patient when you told me you are withholding your birth date from your chatty amateur astrologist bunkmate. That's hilarious. Must be driving her nuts. So I officially met your boy Larry when I was in NYC last month. A cool guy. We chilled at a nice coffee shop near where you live. It's good that you have a loving place to land when you are officially released altogether from the halfway house. Talk about places to land. I was trapped in Oklahoma City during my transfer from California to Pennsylvania for 2 months. And I was a high-security risk, so I spent that entire time locked in the hole, in the middle of summer. I suffered. I'm so fucking happy that I'm done with doing time. I got good at it, but I never want to be good at it again. That's one talent I don't mind squandering. You mentioned seeing your old crimies, that it was chilly at first. It's amazing how misery can instantly bond folks. Once upon a time I was doing time in a California prison but had to go to a county jail to receive another sentence. I was at the county jail for a month and couldn't wait to go back to the state prison. I wanted my old routine, my old friends, my own clothes, better food. So I understand your desire to go back to Danbury. I once felt the same thing. Anyway, stay strong, Piper. You're almost done, and then you can put this thing behind you in a large way. Not completely, but mostly. Until next time, peace. Joe Loya. The MCC tested my endurance and tolerance. At least we had feminine hygiene items, all emblazoned with Bob Barker's name. I finally was allowed to buy shampoo, conditioner, stamps, and food from the commissary, plus tweezers. My brows were in a shocking state, and as there were no mirrors in the MCC, the Jansen sisters and I had to play beauty parlor. I did push-ups and crunches, but there was no place to do yoga without someone eyeballing me, certainly not in our 6-woman cell. It contained the 3 of us, an M&Mlet, a cheerful 6'4" giantess called Tiny, and a new Spanish mommy named Inez, who was also in Chicago on a writ. When Inez had first been arrested, another woman in the county jail had thrown cleaning solution in her eyes and blinded her. After 9 operations, she had recovered partial sight, but she was extremely light-sensitive, and so was allowed to wear gigantic wraparound sunglasses. Inez had just celebrated her 50th birthday. We tried to make it cheerful. Now I didn't just miss Danbury, I also missed Oklahoma City. The Jansen sisters agreed. We talked longingly about doing the shackle dance on the tarmac again. Our shared mantra became, "It can always get worse." We literally repeated it aloud every day, as a charm to ward off the possibility that our situation might grow even more unpleasant. The women's unit was granted privileges only once a week, such as recreation time in what resembled a 1970s elementary school gym, with dead basketballs and no weights, just one medicine ball, and access to a law library that contained cheesy paperbacks in addition to ancient legal texts. We were escorted by a CO to and from these activities like a kindergarten class. During these journeys, we always encountered male prisoners at work. They had far more freedom of movement than we did, which infuriated me. To get to the gym, we had to pass the kitchens, where some hopeful-looking guys were always waiting to catch a glimpse of us. "You ladies need anything up there?" one of them asked one day as we were being herded onto the elevator. "More fruit," I shouted. "I'm going to send you some bananas, Blondie." I could barely contain myself when I got the news that Larry was going to visit me. It took all my self-restraint not to climb up onto one of the unit tables and pound my chest and scream. But the most dangerous thing in prison, jealousy, was not something I wanted to tangle with right now. So I kept it on the down low. Plus, I was growing skeptical that anything would ever go right for me again. On the Saturday he was supposed to come from New York, I took a hot shower. Another prisoner had tipped me off that there was one window of time in the morning when, for some reason, we could get hot water. My hair hung down my back. No hair dryers in the MCC. I went into the bathroom and stared at myself in the metal plate that was bolted over the sinks in lieu of a mirror. It was probably for the best that I couldn't really see what I looked like. I noted the pencil scrapings on the wall, where other prisoners had made makeshift eyeliner by mixing the lead powder and Vaseline. I didn't have that kind of skill. Visiting hours were very short in Chicago. I sat nervously watching the clock. The Jansen sisters sat nervously watching me. "He'll be here," they assured me. It was sort of touching how invested in his visit they were, how they had started to talk about Larry as if they knew him. I felt bad that Hester/Ann's husband was not able to come visit her in Chicago. He lived not far from the prison where she was serving her 7-year sentence. After over an hour of the visiting time had elapsed, I was beside myself. I knew what was happening. The morons who ran the MCC had turned him away. I was sure of it. These people were completely incompetent in every way I had observed so far. Why on earth would visitation be any different? I was beaten and furious. A horrible combination. And then the security door opened, and a CO walked in and conferred with the CO on duty in the unit. "Kerman!" I bolted across the room. When I finally got into the big, dirty visiting room, I felt calmer. There were a lot of prisoners with their families in there, and at first I didn't see Larry, but when I did, I felt faint. I hugged him, and he looked a little faint, too. "You wouldn't believe what they put me through. These people are just unreal," he almost shouted. We sat where we were told, facing each other on molded plastic chairs. I felt truly calm for the first time since I left Danbury. The remaining hour flew by. We talked about how on earth I was going to get home, what was going to happen. "We'll figure it out, babe," he soothed me, squeezing my hand. When the guards called time, I wanted to cry. After I kissed Larry goodbye, I practically backed out of the room so I could see him as long as possible. And then I was being herded into a room with a handful of female prisoners. Everyone had the post-visit glow of happiness, and they all looked a lot better for it. "Piper, you had a visit?" someone asked. "Yeah, my fiancé came to see me." I grinned like a fool. "He came all the way from New York to see you? Wow!" It was as if he had come from the moon. I just nodded. I didn't want to be boastful of my great fortune to have a man like Larry. I had been hearing about the roof since I got to the MCC. Apparently, there was a recreation area up on the top of the building, and when the weather was agreeable, an officer might bring us up there. I had been indoors for weeks now, and I was dreaming about the track and the lake at Danbury every night. Finally, one day it was announced that we could sign up for roof time. As many women crammed into the elevator as could fit. At the top, there were nylon coats we could throw on, and then we were out, high in the sky, albeit caged under razor and chicken wire. There were a couple of basketball hoops up there, and the temperature was in the 40s. I immediately got hiccups from the oxygen differential and just breathed as deeply as I could. The roof reflected the building's triangular footprint, and you could see far in every direction. In one direction were railway yard tracks. A nearby building had a fabulous Art Deco statue at its pinnacle, and to the southeast I could see the lake. I walked to the south side of the rec deck, which was fenced with black iron. The bars were wide enough apart that I could wedge my face between them. I stared out at the lake, scanning the city below me. "Hey, Nora, come here." "What?" She came over. I pointed through the bars. "Isn't that the Congress Hotel?" She stared through the bars for a moment, trying to find the spot where she had packed a suitcase full of money for me to carry more than 10 years before. "I think you're right. You are right. Jesus." Neither of us said anything for a moment. What a dump. The trial finally began. Jonathan Bibby, the guy who had taught Nora how to smuggle drugs way back when, claimed that he had been an innocent art dealer who happened to hang out with a lot of convicted drug smugglers. But the feds had detailed evidence against him, including records of him traveling to Africa on the same flights as Nora, Hester/Ann, and others. Hester/Ann was taken away to appear in court first. She had known the defendant for years. She came back teary-eyed. The defense attorney had ripped her apart. Nora went out next. I remembered that George Freud was somewhere in the building. I figured there was no way they weren't calling other co-defendants as well. On February 14th, I was called to R&D. "Happy Valentine's Day," cracked Nora. She had no idea how close to drowning she was. My escorts to court this time were older, burlier, and more confident. They were also solicitous. "Is there anything we can get you, Piper?" I was stumped by that one. I didn't smoke. I was pretty sure they weren't going to give me scotch. I would love a good cup of coffee. "We'll see what we can do." I had never seen Jonathan Bibby until I was marched into the courtroom in my best orange jumpsuit and stepped into the witness box. Yet I spent what seemed like hours on the stand recounting my own experience while the jury listened. I wondered what they made of what they were hearing. All of the defense attorney's questions to me centered on Nora, so it was obvious that she was the star witness. I truly hated testifying for the government, but I was also pretty peeved that this jackass didn't have the good grace to plead guilty as his co-defendants had and spare us all this hassle and discomfort. On my ride home, my escorts pulled over under the Al. One of them hopped out and returned with a piping hot cup of Dunkin' Donuts coffee. He uncuffed me. "There's sugar and cream in there. I wasn't sure how you take it." They sat in the front seat and smoked, while I enjoyed every sip of that coffee. I listened to the roar of the train above and watched people going about their lives on the street. I wondered if this was as weird as it was going to get. When it was all over, the jury found Bibby guilty. No one felt good. All I wanted to do was go back to real prison, meaning Danbury, and then go home. Within the stifling women's unit, Crystal, the mayor, made an effort to maintain a faint semblance of prison protocol. Of course, this involved the Lord. Crystal was a big fan and liked to listen to a local minister's daily morning TV broadcast turned way up loud. She was a much more persistent proselytizer than any prisoner I had known in Danbury. Every week she would swing by when they called for the church group to go out of the unit, Bible in hand. "Coming to church, ladies?" The Jansen girls would scowl. Although Hester/Ann had been born again, she shared my distaste for prison religious ceremonies. "No thanks, Crystal." She wasn't giving up easily. I figured you had to fight fire with fire. The next time they called us for gym time, I went to look for Crystal. "You come into the gym, Crystal?" Looking at me as if I had lost my rabbit-ass mind, she squawked with outrage, "What? Gym? You won't find me in no gym, Piper. Tire myself out." That Sunday, she was back, optimistic as ever. "You comin' to church, Piper? It's a good one this week." "I'll tell you what, Crystal. You go on to church, and I'm going to ask you to pray for me. And this week, when I go down to the gym, I'm going to work out for you. Is that a deal?" She thought that was the funniest thing she had heard in months. She cackled all the way out the door. From then on, whenever they called our respective faiths to action, we would sing out to each other, "Work out for me, Piper. Pray for me, Crystal." I cornered the unit manager in his office during his once-a-week appearance on the women's floor. I tried to remain calm as I explained that March 4th my release date was drawing close, and I needed to know what was going to happen next. Would they ship me back to Danbury? Would they release me from Chicago? He had no idea. He didn't know anything about it. He was not concerned. I wanted to break everything in his office. Nora and Hester/Ann cast worried eyes on me as I emerged after my conversation. I had kept the fact that my release date was just a week away a secret from everyone in Chicago, especially them. They both had years left to do. Plus, I didn't trust any of the other prisoners not to mess with me in some way, a very typical prison paranoia. So, as far as the sisters were concerned, I was losing it over Con Air, which was very un-Zen of me. "Let's make dinner," said Hester/Ann. I went to retrieve the hard-boiled eggs that had been on ice since breakfast that morning. Anne carefully sliced each oval in half, and Nora mixed the yolks with packets of mayo and mustard, plus generous dashes of hot sauce from the commissary. I tasted it. "Need something." "I know." Nora produced a packet of hot dog relish. I wrinkled my brow. "Are you sure?" "Trust me." I tasted again. It was perfect. Now I carefully filled each half of the egg whites. Nora sprinkled a bit more hot sauce on top. "Not too much," said Hester/Ann. Deviled eggs. We had a feast. The other women admired our dinner, wishing they had saved their eggs, too. The three of us had carved out a place among the few sane women in Chicago. But my God, it was hard. I said goodbye to the sisters when the next Con Air flight left days later, with them on it. They were mystified as to why I had not been called with them to do the shackle dance on the tarmac. They said goodbye to me with sadness and pity in their eyes. I was so upset that I could barely look at them. Part of it was that I wanted so badly to be on that airplane escaping from Chicago. Part of it was that I knew I would probably never see them on the outs. It felt like there was a lot more to say. When they were gone, I got under a blanket on my bunk and cried for hours. I didn't think I could keep going. Although I was days away from my release date, I wasn't sure of what was going to happen. It was totally irrational, but I was beginning to feel like the BOP would never let me go. As a child, a teen, a young adult, I developed a firm belief in my solitude, the not novel concept that we are each alone in the world. Some parts self-reliance, some parts self-protection. This belief offers a binary perspective, powerhouse or victim, complete responsibility or total divorcement, all in or out the door. Carried to its extreme, the idea gives license to the belief that one's own actions do not matter much. We traverse the world in our own bubbles, occasionally breaking through to one another, but largely and ultimately alone. I would seem to have been ready-made for prison time then. As a familiar jailhouse trope says, you come in alone and you walk out alone. And common counsel is to keep to oneself and mind your own business. But that's not what I learned in prison. That's not how I survived prison. What I discovered was that I am emphatically not alone. The people on the outside who rode and visited every week and traveled long distances to come and tell me that I wasn't forgotten, that I wasn't alone, had a tremendous impact on my life. However, most of all, I realized that I was not alone in the world because of the women I lived with for over a year, who gave me a dawning recognition of what I shared with them. We shared overcrowded dorms and lack of privacy. We shared 8 numbers instead of names, prison khakis, cheap food and hygiene items. Most important, we shared a deep reserve of humor, creativity in adverse circumstances, and the will to protect and maintain our own humanity despite the prison system's imperative to crush it. I don't think any of us could have managed those survival techniques alone. I know I couldn't. We needed each other. Small kindnesses and simple pleasures shared were so important, whether given or received, regardless of what quarter they came from, that they brought home to me powerfully that I was not alone in this world, in this life. I shared the most basic operating system with people who ostensibly had little in common with me. I could connect, perhaps with anyone. Now here, in my 3rd prison, I perceived an odd truth that held for each. No one ran them. Of course, somewhere in those buildings, some person with a nameplate on their desk or door was called the warden and nominally ran the place, and below them in the food chain there were captains and lieutenants. But for all practical purposes, for the prisoners, the people who lived in those prisons day in and day out, the captain's chair was vacant, and the wheel was spinning while the sails flapped. The institutions putzed along with the absolute minimum of staff presence, and the staff that were there invariably seemed less than interested in their jobs. No one was present, interacting in any affirmative way with the people who filled those prisons. The leadership vacuum was total. No one who worked in corrections appeared to give any thought to the purpose of our being there, any more than a warehouse clerk would consider the meaning of a can of tomatoes, or try to help those tomatoes understand what the hell they were doing on the shelf. Great institutions have leaders who are proud of what they do and who engage with everyone who makes up those institutions so each person understands their role. But our jailers are generally granted near total anonymity, like the cartoon executioner who wears a hood to conceal his identity. What is the point? What is the reason to lock people away for years when it seems to mean so very little, even to the jailers who hold the key? How can a prisoner understand their punishment to have been worthwhile to anyone when it's dealt in a way so offhand and indifferent? I slumped onto a hard plastic chair, watching BET. The video for Jay-Z's single 99 Problems was playing. The grim, gritty black-and-white images of Brooklyn and its hood-life citizens made me feel homesick for a place where I had never even lived. My last week in prison was the hardest. If I had been shipped back to Danbury, I would have received a boisterous welcome back into the fold and a hasty, tearful send-off into the outside world. In Chicago, I felt terribly alone, separated from all the people and the jubilant going-home rituals I had known in Danbury and had assumed I would one day partake in. I wanted to celebrate my own strength and resilience, my survival of a year in prison, around people who understood me. Instead, what I felt was the treacherous anger that takes over when you don't have one bit of control over your life. The MCC still would not confirm that I would be released on March 4th. Yet even the BOP can't stop the clock. And when the day arrived, I was up, showered, and ready. I knew that Larry was in Chicago, that he was coming to get me. But no staff in Chicago had acknowledged that I was going to be released. No paperwork had been shown to me. I was deeply hopeful, but also deeply skeptical about what would happen that day. My fellow prisoners watched the early morning news broadcast of Martha Stewart's midnight release from Alderson prison camp, and soon it was business as usual, with BET music videos battling Lifetime at top volume on the two TVs. I sat on one of the hard benches, watching the guards' every move. Finally, at 11 a.m., the phone rang. The guard picked it up, listened, hung up, and barked, "Kerman, pack out!" I leaped up, rushed to my locker, retrieving only a small manila envelope of personal letters, leaving behind toiletries and books. I was intensely aware that the women I shared the cell with were all at the beginning of their prison journey, and I was at the end of mine. There was no way to give them all the things I now carried in my head and my heart. "You can have anything in my locker, ladies. I'm going home." The female guard in R&D explained that they had no women's street clothes, so she gave me the smallest pair of men's jeans they had, a green polo shirt, a windbreaker, and a cheap pair of fake suede lace-up shoes with thin plastic soles. They also provided me with what she called a gratuity, $28.30. I was ready for the outside world. The guard led me and another prisoner, a young Spanish guy, to an elevator. We looked at each other as we rode down. He nodded to me. "How much time you do?" 13 months. You? 20. When we got to the bottom, we were in the service entrance. The guard opened the door to the street, and we stepped out. We were on an empty side street, a canyon between the fortress and some office buildings, with a slice of gray sky above us. Homie's people were waiting directly across the street in an SUV, and he broke for the car like a jackrabbit and was gone. I looked around. "Isn't anyone coming to get you?" asked the guard. "Yeah," I said, impatient. "Where are we?" "I'll take you around to the front," he said, reluctant. I turned and started walking briskly ahead of him. 10 yards farther, and I saw Larry, standing in front of the MCC, talking on his phone until he turned and saw me. And then I was running as fast as I could. No one could stop me. This concludes Orange is the New Black. Please visit our website, www.tantor.com, for more information on our growing library of unabridged audiobooks and to take advantage of special offers. Or call toll-free 877-7-TANTOR to request a catalog.